"There's no need to bow," the human said, until he was shocked by why the alien girl did it. Commander Garrett Rivas stood at the viewport of the Terran Alliance flagship, Stalwart Dawn, his steel-gray armor reflecting the soft glow of distant stars. The massive vessel hung in geosynchronous orbit above Verdania, a newly discovered world seeking admission into the Galactic Coalition. His closely cropped dark hair and slight stubble gave him a rugged appearance that had earned him both respect and admiration throughout his illustrious career. "Sir, the Verdanian envoy has arrived," Lieutenant Parker's voice crackled through the communication. "She's requesting immediate audience." "Send her up," Garrett replied, straightening his posture. These diplomatic missions were becoming more frequent as humanity expanded its influence across the stars. Their reputation for being fair but firm negotiators had spread far and wide. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Garrett turned to greet the visitor. His breath caught in his throat. The Verdanian woman who entered was unlike any alien he'd encountered before. Her skin was a mesmerizing shade of emerald, complemented by long, wavy hair of a deeper forest green. She wore a metallic corset that accentuated her humanoid figure, paired with black shorts that left little to the imagination. "Commander Rivas," she spoke, her voice melodious yet formal. "I am Nira Valen, first diplomat of Verdania." Before Garrett could respond to them, Nira dropped to her knees in a fluid motion, then bent forward until her forehead touched the floor. Her hips remained raised in what humans would consider an incredibly provocative position. "Whoa!" Garrett stepped forward, his face flushing. "There's no need to bow, especially not like that. Please stand up." Nira remained in position. "But Commander, this is our highest form of respect. To show anything less would be an insult to your species' greatness." Garrett ran a hand through his hair, flustered. "Look, humans we don't do things this way. Please just stand and we can talk as equals." Nira slowly raised her head, genuine confusion in her large almond-shaped eyes. "As equals? But the stories we've heard, your species achieved in decades what others took centuries to accomplish. You've defeated threats that made empires tremble. How can we consider ourselves your equals?" "Because that's exactly what makes us human," Garrett replied, extending his hand to help her up. "We believe in lifting others up, not looking down on them. Now, shall we discuss your world's petition properly?" Nira accepted his hand, her skin surprisingly warm against his. As she rose, their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Garrett quickly released her hand, trying to maintain his professional demeanor. "You are not what I expected, Commander Rivas," Nira said, studying him with newfound interest. "Call me Garrett," he replied, gesturing toward the conference table. "And trust me, you haven't seen anything yet." Little did either of them know that this unusual first meeting would spark a chain of events that would test not only their growing attraction, but the very foundations of their respective civilizations. Earth's skyline took Nira's breath away. The towering spires of New Singapore gleamed in the setting sun, their surfaces a canvas of orange and gold. Garrett watched her reaction with quiet satisfaction as their shuttle descended toward the diplomatic quarter. "Your world is, extraordinary," Nira whispered, pressing her hand against the viewport. "The vids don't do it justice." "Wait until you see it up close," Garrett replied, trying not to focus on how the fading sunlight played across her emerald skin. The past week of showing her around Earth had been both a pleasure and a sweet torture. The shuttle touched down on a private landing pad atop the Terran Alliance headquarters. As they disembarked, Nira's corset caught the last rays of sunshine, sending prismatic reflections dancing across the deck. "I've arranged for dinner at my private quarters," Garrett said, leading her toward the elevator. "It's been a long day of official tours. I thought you might appreciate something more informal." Nira's lips curved into a knowing smile. "How thoughtful, Garrett. Though I must admit, I find Earth's formal customs far less rigid than expected." The elevator ride was silent, charged with unspoken tension. Garrett could feel Nira's warmth beside him, her presence impossible to ignore. When their shoulders brushed, neither moved away. His quarters occupied the entire top floor of the residential wing. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below, now twinkling with evening lights. "This is beautiful," Nira breathed, walking to the windows. "Though I notice there's no place for me to properly show my respect." And Garrett nearly choked on his drink. "Are you teasing me about that now?" She turned, her green eyes dancing with mischief. "Perhaps your reaction that day was fascinating, so different from what we'd heard about humans." "And what exactly had you heard?" Garrett asked, pouring her a glass of wine. Nera accepted the glass, her fingers brushing his deliberately. "That humans were warriors without peer, unstoppable, relentless, that you'd conquered the stars through sheer force of will." She took a sip, watching him over the rim. "No one mentioned you could blush so charmingly." "I don't blush," Garrett protested, feeling his face warm. "You're doing it now," she said softly, stepping closer. "It's endearing. So many contradictions in one species. You're capable of such power, yet you choose gentleness. You could demand submission, yet you ask for equality." Garrett set his glass down, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "That's what makes us human. We understand that true strength isn't about dominance." "And what is it about?" Nera asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Connection," Garrett replied, reaching out to brush a strand of green hair from her face. "An understanding, meeting as equals." Nera leaned into his touch, her skin warm beneath his fingers. "Then perhaps you should help me understand more about humans, about you." The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable. Nera's lips were soft, tasting of wine and something exotic he couldn't name. Her hands found his chest as his arms encircled her waist, pulling her closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, and Nera's eyes were shining. "I should tell you," she murmured, "that among my people, such intimacy is considered a declaration of intent." "What kind of intent?" Garrett asked, his thumb tracing circles on her lower back. "Intent to bond, to join, to create something new together." She pressed closer, her body fitting perfectly against his. "Does that frighten you?" Garrett looked into her eyes, seeing the universe reflected there. "No," he said honestly. "It probably should, but it doesn't." What followed was a night of discovery, of learning each other's boundaries and desires. Their coupling was both tender and passionate, a dance of two beings from different worlds finding harmony in their differences. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets, Nera traced patterns on Garrett's chest. "I understand now," she said softly. "Understand what?" "Why humans don't need others to bow to them." She propped herself up on an elbow, looking at him intently. "You don't seek submission because you know true power lies in connection, in unity." Garrett pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Now you're getting it." The morning sun had barely risen over New Singapore when Garrett's comm unit erupted with urgent notifications. Beside him, Nera stirred, her green skin glowing softly in the dawn light. "Trouble?" she murmured, watching him scan through the messages with increasingly furrowed brows. You could say that." Garrett sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Looks like someone leaked footage of us entering my quarters last night. It's already hit the major news networks on both Earth and Verdania." Nera's expression remained surprisingly calm. "Ah, so it begins. Earlier than expected, but not unanticipated. You knew this would happen?" She stretched languidly, the sheet sliding down to reveal her metallic corset from the previous night. "Garrett, I'm first diplomat of Verdania. Every move I make is watched, analyzed, and debated. Our relationship was bound to become public knowledge." The comm chimed again. Admiral Henderson's stern face appeared in holographic form above the device. "Commander Rivas, my office, 1 hour. Bring your diplomatic guest." Garrett grimaced as the transmission cut off. That's not his happy voice. "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting." Nera rose gracefully, gathering her scattered clothing. "Though perhaps I should bow extra low for him." "Not funny," Garrett groaned, though he couldn't help smiling. "That's what started this whole situation." "No regrets?" she asked, pausing in her dressing to study his face. Garrett pulled her close for a quick kiss. "Not a single one." The walk to Admiral Henderson's office felt like marching into enemy territory. Personnel they passed either stared openly or pointedly looked away. News traveled fast in the Alliance headquarters. Henderson's office occupied prime real estate in the command tower, with a view that would have been spectacular if the windows weren't currently polarized to complete opacity. The Admiral himself stood with his back to the door as they entered, hands clasped behind him. "Commander Rivas," he said without turning, "do you know what the Verdanian High Council sent us this morning?" "No, sir." "A formal protest. Now Henderson turned, his weathered face unreadable. They claim we're deliberately undermining their cultural authority by allowing one of their highest-ranking diplomats to engage in, what do they call it? Ah yes, inappropriate fraternization with a military officer. That's ridiculous, Garrett started, but Naira stepped forward. If I may, Admiral? At his curt nod, she continued. The High Council's protest is a political maneuver, nothing more. They fear what our relationship represents, the true equality between our species that the Alliance claims to promote. Explain, Henderson demanded, leaning against his desk. In Verdanian culture, status is everything. The bow I performed for Commander Rivas upon our first meeting? It wasn't just a show of respect. It was meant to establish the natural order. Humans as our superiors, Verdanians as willing subordinates. Garrett felt his jaw tighten. You never mentioned that part. Because I rejected it the moment you helped me stand, Naira replied, her eyes soft as she looked at him. You showed me that humans don't want servants or sycophants. You want partners, equals. The Council fears this idea spreading among our people. Henderson's expression had shifted from stern to thoughtful. So your relationship threatens their power structure. Precisely. They'd rather join the Alliance as a protected subsidiary than as true equals. Naira's voice hardened. But I believe my people are ready for more. The Admiral was silent for a long moment, studying them both. Finally, he sighed. Well, this is either the biggest diplomatic crisis of the year or the greatest opportunity we've had to reshape Alliance-Verdanian relations. He straightened up. Commander Rivas, consider yourself temporarily reassigned to full-time diplomatic duties. Your mission is to make this work, whatever this is. Sir? Garrett blinked in surprise. Don't make me spell it out, Commander. If your relationship can help bridge our cultures and bring Verdanian into the Alliance as equals rather than subordinates, then it has my full support. Henderson's stern expression returned. Just try to keep the public displays of affection to a minimum. We're still running a military organization here. As they left the office, Naira slipped her hand into Garrett's. Well, that went better than expected. Maybe, Garrett replied, squeezing her hand. But something tells me the High Council won't give up so easily. Of course not. Naira's smile turned mischievous. They'll probably send assassins next. It's traditional. Garrett stopped walking. Please tell me you're joking. About the tradition? Number about it happening. She pressed closer, her warmth seeping through his uniform. Let's just say I took certain precautions before pursuing you. I didn't become first diplomat by being naive. You really did plan this all out, didn't you? Not everything, she admitted, reaching up to trace his jaw. I didn't plan on falling in love. That was unexpected. Garrett pulled her into an alcove, away from prying eyes. Any other surprises I should know about? Many, she whispered against his lips. But isn't that what makes humans so fascinating? Your ability to adapt to anything? The Grand Assembly Hall of New Singapore buzzed with anticipation. Representatives from both Earth and Verdania filled the tiered seating, their murmurs echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Garrett stood backstage, adjusting his formal dress uniform, while Naira watched with undisguised appreciation. You clean up well, Commander, she purred, running her fingers along his collar. Her own attire had evolved. She still wore her signature metallic corset, but now paired with an elegant floor-length skirt that shimmed with each movement. Nervous? He asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. About addressing the combined assembly? No. She stepped closer, her familiar scent making his pulse quicken. About telling them our news? Perhaps a little. Their recent discovery had been unexpected. Medical scans had confirmed what they'd suspected for weeks. Despite the supposed biological barriers between their species, Naira was carrying their child. The news had initially been kept private, but they decided it needed to be part of today's presentation. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of all designations, Admiral Henderson's voice boomed through the hall. We're here today to discuss the future of human-Verdanian relations. That's our cue, Garrett said, offering his arm. They emerged onto the stage to a mixture of applause and whispers. The Verdanian delegation, seated to the left, remained pointedly silent. Their High Council representatives wore expressions of carefully crafted neutrality. Naira took the podium first, her presence commanding immediate attention. I stand before you not in submission, but in partnership. When I first met Commander Rivas, I greeted him as our traditions demanded, with complete deference. His response changed everything. She glanced at Garrett, her eyes soft with memory. He helped me to my feet. A simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes about humanity's true nature. They don't seek to dominate, to rule, to demand submission. They seek to elevate, to collaborate, to love. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One of the Verdanian council members stood, his voice sharp. You speak of love first, diplomat, yet you violate our most sacred traditions. Your relationship with this human undermines everything our society stands for. Does it? Garrett stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. Or does it demonstrate exactly what the Alliance was meant to be? A union of equals, each bringing their own strengths to create something greater than the sum of its parts. He turned to address the entire assembly. Humanity's strength isn't in demanding others bow to us. It's in helping others stand tall beside us. Yes, Naira and I have broken with tradition. Yes, we've challenged conventional wisdom about what's possible between our species. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. And yes, we've created something unprecedented. Something that proves just how compatible our peoples truly are. Naira placed her free hand over her abdomen, the gesture unmistakable. The hall erupted in gasps and exclamations. Even the High Council members looked shocked. Impossible, one shouted. Apparently not, Naira replied, her voice carrying a note of triumph. Our child represents something you fear more than anything. Proof that humans and Verdanians can create a future together as true equals. The assembly dissolved into chaos, but Admiral Henderson's voice cut through the din. Order. This development, while unexpected, only reinforces what we've long suspected, that our species are more compatible than anyone imagined. The question now is, do we embrace this future or cling to outdated traditions? A young Verdanian diplomat suddenly rose from her seat. Without warning, she turned to face the High Council members and straightened her spine, standing tall instead of offering the traditional bow. One by one, other Verdanians followed suit until half their delegation stood proudly upright. Garrett felt Naira squeeze his hand. It's happening, she whispered. They're choosing to stand. The High Council members huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers. Finally, their leader approached the podium, his expression conflicted. Perhaps, he said slowly, it is time for some traditions to evolve. If humans can teach us to stand proud while remaining humble, to be strong while showing compassion, maybe there is wisdom in this union after all. Later that night, in the privacy of their quarters, Naira curled against Garrett's chest, both still buzzing from the day's events. You know, she murmured, tracing patterns on his skin. I never did tell you the full meaning of that first bow. Oh, Garrett ran his fingers through her green hair, marveling at its silk-like texture. In the oldest Verdanian texts, it's not just about submission. It's about recognizing someone who will change your world forever. She lifted her head to meet his eyes. I knew the moment I saw you that you would change everything. The medical bay of the Terran Alliance's advanced research facility gleamed with cutting-edge technology. Garrett paced nervously while Dr. Susan Fletcher studied the holographic display of Naira's latest scan. Fascinating, the doctor murmured, manipulating the three-dimensional image. The genetic integration is remarkable. Your child appears to be taking the best traits from both species. Naira reclined on the examination table, her growing belly barely visible beneath her modified corset. And the compatibility issues? Better than we could have hoped. Dr. Fletcher smiled. Your body's adaptation to human DNA is unprecedented. It's almost as if your species was designed to be compatible with ours. Garrett stopped pacing to study the hologram. The tiny form floating before them showed clear signs of both human and Verdanian heritage. A perfect blend of their races. The media's calling it a miracle, he said, taking Naira's hand. The first natural human Verdanian child. Natural being the key word, Dr. Fletcher added, making notes. We've had genetic hybridization before, but never successful natural conception. Your child will be a symbol of true biological compatibility between our species. Nira's free hand traced patterns over her abdomen. The High Council's scientists are particularly interested in that aspect. They've requested full access to my medical records. Which they're not getting, Garrett said firmly. Our child isn't going to be a research subject. Agreed, Dr. Fletcher nodded. Though I would like to continue monitoring your pregnancy. The data could help other mixed-or species couples. Later, as they walked through the facility's botanical gardens, Nira pulled Garrett into a secluded alcove. The artificial sunlight filtered through exotic foliage, casting green shadows that matched her skin. You're worried, she stated, pressing against him. About the council's interest? Yes. He wrapped his arms around her, careful of her growing belly. About us? Never. She nuzzled his neck. Remember when I told you that Bo was about recognizing someone who would change your world? How could I forget? It led to all this. What I didn't tell you, she continued, her breath warm against his skin, is that in the oldest versions of our traditions, it was specifically used by females to identify potential mates who could strengthen our bloodline. Garrett pulled back slightly to look at her. Wait, so that first meeting was essentially a very formal proposition? Her eyes sparkled with mischief. Why do you think I wore that particular outfit? You planned this from the start? He couldn't decide whether to be impressed or shocked. Not exactly. I knew humans were physically compatible with Verdanians. Our scientists had theorized it for years. I knew I wanted to explore that compatibility. She pressed closer, her body fitting perfectly against his. What I didn't plan was falling so completely in love with you. Their kiss was interrupted by a gentle kick from within Nira's belly. They both laughed, hands joining over the spot where their child made his presence known. The council scientists have a theory, Nira said softly. They believe Verdanians might be descended from an ancient human colony, lost during Earth's first attempts at interstellar travel. It would explain our compatibility, our similar appearance. And your cultural obsession with humans? Garrett teased. Perhaps. She traced his jaw with one finger. Though I prefer to think we were always meant to find each other again, to stand together as equals. A calm alert chimed, reminding them of their afternoon appointment, a meeting with both human and Verdanian cultural experts to discuss blending traditions for their upcoming marriage ceremony. Speaking of standing together, Garrett said, checking the message, we should probably head back, unless you'd rather shock everyone by being fashionably late? Nira's answering smile was decidedly wicked. Well, we are setting new precedents for human-Verdanian relations. Why not add tardiness to the list? Their laughter echoed through the garden as they made their way back, hand in hand, discussing potential ways to combine their culture's marriage traditions without causing too much scandal. Just promise me one thing, Garrett said as they approached the conference room. No ceremonial bowing during the wedding? No promises, Nira replied with a wink. After all, it worked out pretty well the first time. The ancient ceremonial hall on Verdania shimmered with bioluminescent crystals, their soft light playing across the gathered dignitaries. Garrett stood before the ornate archway, his dress uniform adorned with both Terran Alliance medals and traditional Verdanian symbols of unity. Nervous? Admiral Henderson whispered, standing beside him as Earth's official representative. About marrying the woman I love? No. Garrett adjusted his collar. About navigating two different species worth of wedding traditions without starting an interstellar incident? Maybe a little. The Admiral chuckled. Well, at least they agreed to modify the traditional entrance ceremony. Indeed, that had been their first major cultural compromise. Instead of Nira approaching in the traditional submissive bow, they designed something new, a ceremony that honored both cultures while emphasizing their equality. The hall's crystalline lights dimmed, then slowly brightened in a wave of green and gold. The massive doors at the far end opened, revealing Nira. Garrett's breath caught in his throat. She wore a gown that seemed to float around her, the fabric a seamless blend of Verdanian living silk and Earth's finest materials. Her metallic corset, now elegant and ceremonial, accentuated her pregnancy in a way that made her look like an ancient fertility goddess. Her green hair was interwoven with tiny lights that matched the hall's crystals. And as she began her approach, the assembled guests watched in fascination. This was the moment that would set the tone for all future human-Verdanian unions. Nira moved with grace, her steps deliberate and proud. When she reached the midpoint of the hall, she stopped. This was where, traditionally, she would have performed the ceremonial bow of submission. Instead, she stood tall, her chin lifted, her eyes meeting Garrett's directly, a gesture that caused murmurs among the Verdanian traditionalists. Garrett stepped forward to meet her, matching her stance. They stood facing each other, equals in every way as the hall fell silent. "I stand before you," Naira's voice rang out clearly, "not in submission, but in partnership." "I stand with you," Garrett replied, taking her hands in his, "not as master, but as mate." The High Council's chief minister stepped forward, his expression a careful blend of traditional solemnity and progressive acceptance. "We gather today to witness not just a union of two beings, but a bridge between worlds. Through their love, Commander Garrett Rivas and First Diplomat Naira Valen have shown us a new way forward." As the ceremony proceeded, blending Earth's exchange of vows with Verdanian bonding rituals, Garrett couldn't take his eyes off Naira. The way the crystal's light played across her green skin, the subtle movements of their child within her, the love shining in her eyes. It all seemed somehow more significant than the political implications of their union. The traditional Verdanian blessing was modified, its words of submission replaced with promises of mutual support and respect. When it came time for the human tradition of kissing the bride, they decided to keep it, much to the fascination of the Verdanian guests, who found the practice both shocking and intriguing. At the celebration afterward, Nikra pulled Garrett onto a private balcony overlooking the capital city's bioluminescent forest. The three moons of Verdania cast multiple shadows around them. "Happy?" she asked, pressing against him in a way that made his pulse quicken, despite the formal setting. "More than I ever thought possible." He wrapped his arms around her, feeling their child move between them. "Though I'm still trying to understand how that first vow led to all this." Nira laughed softly. "Would you believe me if I told you I practiced that bow for hours before our first meeting?" "Really?" The angle had to be perfect. Provocative enough to intrigue you, but formal enough to maintain diplomatic propriety. She traced patterns on his chest. "Though I didn't expect you to help me up quite so quickly. Most humans I'd studied would have at least enjoyed the view for a moment." "Most humans haven't spent years learning to respect alien cultures," he replied, then grinned. "Though I'll admit, the view was memorable." Their laughter was interrupted by a soft chime, a reminder that they were expected back at the celebration. But as they turned to rejoin their guests, Nira paused. You know," she said thoughtfully, "there is one traditional ceremony we haven't completed yet." "Oh," her smile turned mischievous. "The private bonding ritual, very sacred, very intimate." "Let me guess, it involves bowing?" "Among other things." She pressed closer, her warmth intoxicating. "Though I'm sure we can modify it to suit both our taste." The penthouse suite atop New Singapore's diplomatic quarter had been transformed into a perfect blend of two worlds. Verdanian bioluminescent plants cast their soft glow across Earth-style furniture, while holographic windows could shift between views of both planets' landscapes. Garrett stood in what would be the nursery, supervising as installation drones positioned a hybrid crib, designed to accommodate their child's unique genetic heritage. The material was a revolutionary combination of Verdanian living crystal and Earth's smartest metals, adapting its temperature and firmness to the baby's needs. "The medical suite is ready," Naira announced, entering the room. Her pregnancy had progressed beautifully, her green skin now carrying an almost ethereal glow. She'd modified her signature corset again, the living metal expanding to accommodate her growing belly while maintaining its alluring design. "All ready?" Garrett turned, admiring how she managed to make even wadding look graceful. "I thought Dr. Fletcher said we had another month?" Verdanian pregnancies are more flexible than human ones. Nira ran her hand over the crib's surface, watching it respond to her touch. "Especially with hybrid births. Better to be prepared." She moved to the window, switching the view to Verdania's capital at night. The bioluminescent forest pulsed with life, reminding Garrett of the night they'd first made love. "Having second thoughts about staying on Earth?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "No." She leaned back against him. "Though I admit, I miss the forest sometimes. The way they sing at night." Garrett activated a hidden control panel, and suddenly the room filled with the subtle, harmonic resonance of Verdanian crystal trees. Nira gasped in delight. How did you—" "I had some help from your cultural ministry. They're calling it the Heritage Integration Project, helping hybrid families maintain connections to both worlds." Nira turns in his arms, her eyes shining. You continue to amaze me, Garrett Rivas, just when I think I've figured out all of humanity's wonderful surprises. Speaking of surprises, he grinned, wait until you see what I've done with the bedroom. The master suite had been his special project, combining the best of both their preferences. The bed itself was a triumph of bioengineering. Verdanian living silk sheets atop an Earth-designed therapeutic mattress, all surrounded by subtle crystalline growths that could provide anything from mood lighting to environmental controls. It's perfect, Naira breathed, running her hand over the silk. Though I notice you've included quite a few surfaces at various heights. Well, Garrett pulled her close. I seem to recall someone mentioning the importance of maintaining certain traditions. Their laughter turned to softer sounds as they christened their new home, their passion somehow deeper now that they were truly building a life together. Later, as they lay entwined, Naira traced the new tattoo on Garrett's chest, a Verdanian symbol of family rendered in bioluminescent ink. I've been thinking about names, she said softly. Traditional Verdanian ones? Actually, I was considering something new. Like us. She propped herself up on one elbow. On Verdania, children's names often tell the story of their conception. In our case, Garrett chuckled. Oh, we're not naming our child Bo. No, she smiled, but perhaps something that honors how we met, how you showed me, showed all of us, a better way. Something about standing together? Exactly. She placed his hand on her belly, where their child moved strongly. In the old Verdanian tongue, Astra means to rise, combined with the human name Dawn. Astra Dawn Rivas, Garrett tested the name, rising together at the beginning of a new day, perfect for the child of a human who helped a Verdanian stand tall. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by a priority alert from Admiral Henderson. Garrett checked the message and laughed. What is it? Apparently, our story has inspired a trend. The Admiral says he's received 16 requests for human Verdanian cultural exchange programs in the last week alone. Naira's eyes sparkled with mischief. Should we warn them about the bowing part? Definitely not, Garrett pulled her close again. Let them figure that out for themselves. Though maybe we should suggest they install padding in the diplomatic quarters. Garrett, what? I'm just being practical. Not everyone has your perfect balance. Their playful banter was interrupted by a soft chime, Dr. Fletcher requesting a final check of the medical suite's equipment. As they dressed to meet her, Naira paused by the nursery door. You know, she said thoughtfully, when I first learned about humans, our historians painted you as warriors who conquered the stars through sheer force of will. And now I know the truth. She smiled, radiant with love and pride. You conquered us by helping us stand beside you, by showing us how to be strong without losing our grace. Garrett kissed her softly. Well, you did make quite an impression with that first bow. The medical suite's monitors pulsed with a harmonious blend of human and Verdanian vital signs. Garrett paced the length of the room, his normally composed military bearing giving way to expectant father anxiety. Dr. Fletcher monitored the readings while consulting with her Verdanian counterpart, Dr. Pellar, their combined expertise necessary for this unprecedented birth. Garrett, Naira called from the birthing chamber, her voice strong despite her labor. Stop pacing and come here. He was at her side instantly, marveling at how beautiful she looked even now. Her green skin sparkled with a bioluminescent sheen, a Verdanian biological response to childbirth that filled the room with a soft, calming glow. You know, she said between controlled breaths, on Verdania, this would be happening in a crystal forest with the entire community singing harmonics. We could activate the environmental simulators, Garrett offered, but Naira squeezed his hand. No need. You're my song now. Dr. Fletcher approached with another reading. The baby's genetic markers are stabilizing beautifully. It seems your bodies know exactly what to do, even if we doctors are still catching up. Remarkable, Dr. Pellar added, his traditional Verdanian stoicism failing to hide his excitement. The child is creating its own unique biological patterns, taking the best from both species. Naira suddenly gasped, her grip on Garrett's hand tightening. The room's bioluminescence pulsed brighter, and the monitors showed a surge of activity. It's time now, Doctor, Fletcher announced, moving into position. Remember what we discussed about the hybrid delivery process? What followed was a blur of activity, medical terminology in 2 languages, and moments of breathtaking intensity. Garrett remained focused on Neri, supporting her as she brought their child into existence through a perfect blend of human determination and Verdanian grace. The first cry that filled the room was unlike anything any of them had heard before, a sound that seemed to resonate with both the crystal fixtures and the metal medical equipment. "She's perfect," Dr. Fletcher breathed, cradling the newborn. "Absolutely perfect." Astra Dawn Rivas had her mother's green skin, though slightly lighter, with subtle iridescent patterns that shifted like sunlight through leaves. Her hair was a darker green with streaks of her father's brown, but it was her eyes that caught everyone's attention. They were distinctly human in shape, but held the deeper, more vibrant colors of Verdanian genetics. As the doctors conducted their initial examinations, Garrett helped Naira sit up, supporting her as she reached for their daughter. "She's going to change everything," Naira whispered as Astra was placed in her arms. "Look how strong she is already." Indeed, the infant seemed remarkably alert, her eyes focusing on her parents with an intensity that seemed beyond normal newborn capabilities. "Just like her mother," Garrett said softly, touching Astra's tiny hand, already defying expectations. The baby grabbed his finger with surprising strength, and both parents gasped as a subtle glow pulsed between them. Astra had inherited her mother's bioluminescent abilities, but seemed to be expressing them in response to emotional connections rather than traditional Verdanian stimuli. "Now that," Dr. Pellar said, making rapid notes, "is unprecedented. As is her grip strength," Dr. Fletcher added. "It seems she's inherited human physical capabilities along with Verdanian biological traits." A soft chime announced Admiral Henderson's arrival. He entered carrying what appeared to be an ancient Earth book bound in leather. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, taking in the scene with poorly concealed emotion. "I thought you might want this for the official record." The book, it turned out, was a special registry being created for hybrid families, a physical record to complement the digital ones, inspired by old Earth traditions. "The first entry," Henderson said proudly as he recorded Astra's details, "of many to come if the latest diplomatic reports are anything to go by." "More human Verdanian couples?" Garrett asked, still captivated by his daughter's ever-changing eye colors. "Among others, it seems your story has inspired quite a few species to reconsider their compatibility assumptions. The Alliance is already drafting new protocols for mixed species unions." Nira laughed softly, "All because you helped me stand up that day." "Actually," Henderson smiled, "I have it on good authority that several other diplomatic meetings have included similar traditional greetings, though none quite as memorable as yours, first diplomat." "Speaking of traditions," Dr. Pellar interjected, "there is the matter of the blessing of the stars." "No bowing," Garrett and Naira said simultaneously, then laughed as Astra responded with a pulse of bioluminescence. "We'll create our own traditions," Naira added, looking down at their daughter, "just as she'll create her own path." 6 months after Astra's birth, the observation deck of the Terran Alliance headquarters sparkled with the light of 1,000 stars. Garrett stood at the window, watching his daughter levitate a small crystal toy with a combination of Verdanian biokinetics and what appeared to be pure human willpower. "She's getting stronger," Naira observed, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. Her metallic corset clinked softly against his formal uniform. "Doctor, Fletcher says she's developing abilities neither of our species possessed individually." "Synergistic evolution," Garrett quoted, turning to embrace his wife. "The whole being greater than the sum of its parts." Astra giggled, her skin pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that matched her emotional state. Another unique hybrid trait. The crystal toy danced in complex patterns that shouldn't have been possible for an infant her age. "The High Council is still trying to understand how she does that," Nira said, watching their daughter with pride. "They've never seen anyone manipulate crystalline structures with such precision, and the human scientists are baffled by her accelerated development." Garrett chuckled as Astra created a miniature light show with her bioluminescence. "Though I think she just enjoys surprising everyone. Like mother, like daughter?" Naira's eyes sparkled with familiar mischief. "I was thinking more about her father's tendency to break with tradition." Their playful banter was interrupted by Admiral Henderson's arrival. He carried a data tablet and wore an expression of barely contained excitement. "You'll want to see this," he said, handing them the tablet. The latest statistics from the Interspecies Relations Bureau. The numbers were staggering. In the 6 months since Astra's birth, over 300 human Verdanian couples had registered for union approval. Dozens of other species had begun exploring compatibility with humans, inspired by their success story. "It's not just about reproduction anymore," Henderson explained. "Your example of cultural integration has sparked a revolution in how species interact. The old hierarchies are falling away, replaced by genuine partnerships." Astra chose that moment to float her crystal toy over to the Admiral, making it dance before his eyes. Henderson laughed, a sound that would have been unthinkable from the stern military commander a year ago. "The next generation," he said softly, "will see possibilities we never imagined." Later that evening, in their penthouse suite, Garrett and Naira put Astra to bed in her hybrid crib. The nursery's walls shimmered with a combination of Earth constellations and Verdanian crystal patterns, creating a peaceful environment that celebrated both her heritages. "Remember when I first bowed to you?" Naira asked as they watched their daughter drift off to sleep, her skin giving off a soft, contented glow. "How could I forget? You nearly gave me a heart attack." Garrett pulled her close, his hands finding the familiar curves of her corset. "I was so certain I knew what humans were. Warriors who'd conquered the stars through sheer force of will." She turned in his arms, her green eyes reflecting the starlight. "I never expected to find such gentleness, such wisdom in helping others stand tall. And I'd never expected an alien diplomatic mission to lead to all this." He gestured to their sleeping daughter, their home, their life together. "Though I have to admit, your traditional greeting was quite the attention-getter." Nira's laugh was low and seductive. "Want to see some other traditional positions?" Their passion had only grown stronger since Astra's birth, each intimate moment deepened by their shared journey and the miracle of their love, creating something entirely new in the universe. Later, as they lay entwined in their bed of living silk and smart metals, Naira traced the luminescent tattoo on Garrett's chest, now paired with a matching one that pulsed in sync with Astra's sleeping rhythms. "We did it," she whispered. "We showed them all that love doesn't bow to boundaries or traditions." "We're still showing them," Garrett replied, kissing her softly. "Every day, every moment, we're proving that the future belongs to those who dare to stand together." In her crib, Astra stirred slightly, her dreams creating patterns of light that danced across the ceiling, a perfect blend of human determination and Verdanian grace, lighting the way forward for generations to come. And so their story became legend in the annals of both worlds. The tale of a bow that led to a revolution, a love that transcended species, and a child who embodied the infinite possibilities that await when hearts are brave enough to rise above tradition and stand together as equals under the vast canopy of stars.